Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Legends of Runeterra metagame breakdown. It's that time again and we finally have the first data set to look at post-balance patch with the first sort of preliminary metagame. There's a lot of things still shaping up and in flux, and I have a bunch of thoughts to share on what is currently popular and doing well and where things might be going and how some of these decks will be long-term and so on and so forth. So you know the drill. Before we dive right in, hit the subscribe button down below for more, and let me briefly introduce you to today's sponsor. Remember guys, I'll do one of these videos each week to keep you posted on what's popular and what is doing well. We usually cover the top 5 most popular and the top 5 highest win rate decks of the last week based on data provided by mobalytics. I'll put the links to their metagame stats in the description down below. We're only looking at master rank stats to keep it as high level and representative as possible, even though it might not reflect as well on what's going on at your rank. Depending on what rank you are, it gives you a better idea of how these decks perform at a higher and higher skill level and what to like aim for in terms of how the deck should be performing as opposed to how it might be performing for you and stuff like that. All right, so yeah, I'll take you away to the sponsor and then we'll take a look at the stats. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, one of the leading virtual private network providers out there. A virtual private network keeps your data secure and yourself anonymous while using the internet. NordVPN comes with super fast servers, allows you to unlock your favorite entertainment websites like Netflix. They provide a 30-day money-back guarantee. They also have an included cybersecurity suite, which acts as an ad blocker to boot. They don't lock any of your data, provide a 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 6 simultaneous connections, so one account covers most or all of your electronic devices. And most importantly, they don't have any bandwidth limit, so you can use it non-stop without it getting throttled, which is particularly important for heavy users like us. It also won multiple awards and comes highly recommended by top technology experts. So if you're still surfing online without a VPN, now is the time to change that. Get NordVPN now, 70% off for a 3-year plan, including 1 month extra for free using the code ManuS or the personalized link in the description down below. And now on to today's content. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, let's take a look at the decks. Just a friendly reminder, if you're not aware, I'm usually streaming Monday through Friday during the day, like early to late afternoon, German time, Central European time. Over on Twitch, you can also find the information to that and other social media links in the description down below to check out my stream and catch me live, talking about decks, brewing decks, climbing, and so on. So yeah, come and hang out. Alright, so first off, we have Demacia Ionia. This is basically just the regular Demacia Bannerman midrange. Weirdly enough, for some reason, this version isn't even running Bannerman, which is very wrong, but I'll get into that in a moment. This is basically the Demacia midrange deck that we know. It's just going back to trying Greenglade Caretaker and Shen as a splash in order to benefit from their power level. Greenglade Caretaker is really powerful 1-drop. Shen just got a whole lot better. And this deck was around in the past in a similar form by Sixo after Super JJ built the first Shen barrier, like Shen Fiora barrier version that wasn't just Demacia Splash. It was a heavy Demacia Ionia deck. And then Sixo moved on to something like this. I think he got rank 1 with it, or at least got like top 10 and did really well with it, which was closer to this, but it had Bannerman, which is the whole point of only running 6 Ionia cards, so that you get to play Bannerman at a reliable rate. So looking at this list, the first thing that I think that is very wrong is not running Bannerman. Second thing is not running Bannerman over Grizzled Ranger. Grizzled Ranger, since its nerf, is notably worse. It's still a solid card, but not that great. And Bannerman is just a much better card, since the Bannerman nerf made Bannerman less worse than the Ranger nerf, the Ranger and Badger nerf made Ranger worse. The one thing that I like here is that the person that populated this list realized that Prodigy is better than Badger, since I think since the Badger nerf, it's very clearly Prodigy over Badger. Before it was close, because you got a lot of stats for not having Challenger. Now you only get +1 attack for not having Challenger, and Challenger just does a lot more. So that's an important part here. I think 2 Brightsteel formation is probably one too many. Sixo had 1 back then and didn't even have the clunky unyielding spirits back then. So having 2 spirit and 2 formation is too clunky. While Sixo really liked the pursuits, I'm not a big fan in these, and they're kind of win more. I could be wrong on this, but I have a similar version of this deck that I have been trying a bit, and I have no Relentless Pursuit. I have a Prismatic Barrier Overdose. And regarding, and I basically have like 2 Ranger's Resolve over a Brightsteel formation and the second Unyielding Spirit, and otherwise my list looks basically the same. Ranger's Resolve is too good not to run at least 1, maybe even 2. But yeah, this is a potential direction to take Bannerman, Demacia midrange, if you put the Bannermans in, which really should be in here. I'm not sure, and my friend Patrick that I'm talking and testing a bunch with, who's playing a lot of Demacia right now, not a big fan of giving up Garen for splashing Caretaker and Shen. So he's currently really happy with the straight sort of mono Demacia Bannerman, which could very possibly be right, but this is an interesting direction to like try with, because Shen and Caretaker are pretty powerful cards. They're just different from like what you normally have, like Garen and so on, but they also make the deck a bit less clunky and a bit smoother and faster, which can be nice. So yeah, keep this in mind. Consider this as a variation of the larger Demacia midrange archetype, basically. And one form of these Demacia midrange archetypes will remain tier 1. I'm pretty sure of that. Whether the Shen Caretaker splash version will prevail, or it will be more of a straight up mono Demacia, or with a light splash of one card. Like for example, my friend and I currently are trying Omen Hawk over Grizzled Ranger as a splash in the mono Demacia version, because he has been pretty unhappy with Ranger and felt the deck was a bit too clunky anyway, and Omen Hawk seemed like the best possible splash if you want to splash anything right now. Deny doesn't seem that well positioned and necessary right now. Once it becomes more important, that could be a card that would be slotted in there, but for now just Omen Hawk having a bit more 1-drops, making your Bannerman better, making your units line up better is really nice, and we just started experimenting with this. Anyway, on to deck number 4. Fourth most popular deck is kind of a jump from the last one. Might have to do with the fact that some of these Demacia decks are splintered. Like if you put them all together in their different variations, like if you put together these Fiora Shen decks with the like Fiora Garen decks and the like Lucian Garen decks and so on, which are all basically just minor variations of the same larger archetype, but are grouped based on champions a lot of the time in this game, you certainly would get a higher number but yeah, I'm still currently looking at the like more specific champion-oriented archetypes, but keep that in mind about a deck like Demacia. Here we have Deep, also one of the tier 1 decks currently. I'm not the biggest fan of the deck, to be honest, which is why I haven't played it that much, because when I played it, it never felt that great. But it seems to be tier 1, it's doing fairly well in tournaments, it's quite popular, people doing well with it, so it probably is a tier 1 deck, not a good tier 2 deck, and it, especially also in popularity, as you can see. But I personally don't like it that much. But one of the things I found is if you want to play this deck and want to be able to beat Demacia, like Bannerman decks, you basically have to play like two Ruinations or something, because it tested the matchup a bunch, and despite what some people think and kept telling me, this matchup is not good for Deep at all. It's basically draw Ruination or bust. Like the good Bannerman players will just consistently out-tempo you and run you over, which is kind of like not even that hard to see if you look at the Deep deck. The deck is very tempo inefficient, and if someone just kind of explodes onto the board and takes control of the board, the deck is not good at managing with this. And by the time they come online and try to take over is basically the time that a deck like Bannerman just kills you. So you usually like at least a turn too slow. Ruination on turn 6 or 7 would fix that, but if you don't draw that, you're usually just dead in the waters. That's how the games went in testing, like every time. Yeah, not a big fan of Salvage for that reason. I think the card's super clunky. I never felt like that's what the deck needs anyway. You have pretty powerful top end in most matchups, so you really don't need like 4 mana draw 2. The other thing is Jettison is so important to get to deep fast, because that's another thing that's very important. So running 3 Salvage but only 2 Jettison is so wrong. But this is apparently the most popular list according to data. So just some thoughts here. I've seen more and more Mist Call lately. Not a big fan of these. People are moving away from Lure, which I'm not sold is correct, but like I said, since I don't have that much experience with the archetype, there's not that much that I can say. Aristocrat, not needed anymore, with Burn on a massive decline, and also now having 2 out of 3 1-drops that can't be blocked by Aristocrat. But playing an Aristocrat over the 3rd Sawney Toad is very wrong in many ways, if you ask me, because they sort of do the same thing, except Toad also gains your life and helps you get to deep, which is important. I can see a Thresh being better than the 3rd Maokai. That's an interesting direction, and I like some Atrocity. Not a big fan of Terror of the Tides. It kind of seems win more. Once you get to that point, you should be winning anyway, most of the time. I'm more interested, if at all, at the Shipwreck guy, the big sea monster, because that's at least like a good card to have in the mirror, especially if they like try to overpower you. That's a great way to get some value, and is also a great play if they try to Maokai you to like post Maokai value and stuff like that. But yeah, this is deep. 4th most popular deck. Quite a bunch of thoughts here. Hope this is helpful to you guys. And let's move on. Next we have Freljord Noxus. This version is Vladimir Sejuani. Another version that I've seen a bunch is basically Swain Sejuani. So there's similar archetypes. This version is basically trying to make use of the newly buffed Vladimir, which is solid, but I think the buff is kind of minor. And sure, the leveled Vlad now draining can be nice and can help you win some close races, but more often than not, I feel like it's kind of more tacked on and sort of trivial. I have a version that I put together with my friend and worked on a bit that is like Vladimir Swain, which is kind of nice, since they sort of work with each other pretty well. They help each other level in an extent, or like Vlad helps Swain level. Swain doesn't really do that much for Vlad, to be honest, but Vlad is also the easier to level, so it makes sense that Vlad helps Swain, because Swain is the one that has a more narrow leveling condition. This list overall looks okay. Pretty sure this deck will not be tier 1, might not even be tier 2 long term. Not sure if you actually need Culling Strike, not sold on that. Crimson Awakener is something that we didn't run. It's a bit awkward. This deck plays a lot of force and is a bit clunky. Not running the actual Crimson Curator seems pretty questionable to me. The direction we had was also better at doing Swain stuff, obviously, because we were running Swain, so we had Imperial Demolitionist and stuff like that. I think the main appeal of running Swain is that Leviathan is so good and such a powerful like late game plan and win condition in its own right that I'm a big fan of Swain here. But this list looks okay at the very least. I'm not sure if it's like the best direction for the color combination in the archetype, but it's a decent option, and it's currently pretty popular because it's something that people tried right after the patch for obvious reasons. But yeah, I don't think the deck is like actually that competitively viable. It's probably decent, and if so, this is certainly not like the final or ideal version. If the deck has enough potential to stick around as something like a tier 2 deck, pretty sure it's not capable of remotely being a tier 1 deck. It just doesn't have the sort of flexibility and inherent raw power and universality to it that something like a Bannerman midrange deck, for example, has. Just a kind of generic middle of the pack midrange deck that does some nice stuff and has some nice cards, but that's not enough to be a tier 1 deck usually. Alright, next we have Bilgewater Freljord, or Misfortune Sejuani specifically. This specific version is, I think, built by BBG, by Bruised by God, and I think this is the best or close to the best version of MF Sejuani. There are other versions that are more heavy Freljord, Bilgewater half and half, that make the Yordle Grifters worse, and playing a bunch of cards that aren't even that great or adding that much to it. So definitely like this direction a lot more, but I think all in all, this deck is also a bit of a trap in the sense that it's at best like an okay tier 2 deck. This, just from experience and knowing what makes decks how good and stuff, I'm pretty sure this deck is not capable of being a tier 1 archetype either, but it might be a decent tier 2 archetype. It has some powerful stuff, like the Pilfer Plunder cards are pretty good. The deck has quite some card advantage. And Riptide Rex especially is a super powerful 8-drop, and this is one of the better, if not the best homes for the card, which is one of the main reasons I think why this deck has legs. But in my experience, the deck isn't even that great at leveling Misfortune or Sejuani, which is really awkward. I like the inclusion of Scout, but I'm not sure Island Navigator is ideal. The deck doesn't have a 5-drop and has 2 4-drops. And Navigator, it doesn't have much ways to make Navigator matter more. So a lot of the time your Navigator will just be kind of in an awkward spot. Sure, if you have MF out, it still adds a ping to the units, but they will often be still in a size where they just be eaten by blockers despite the extra damage from Misfortune. So I would probably try to run the Razor Scale Hunter over Navigator to test that, because it's a 5-drop, the deck doesn't have a 5-drop, so it doesn't hurt to upgrade one of your 4-drops to a 5-drop, because a fair share of the time that will happen anyway. Except you get a lot more power, you get more board control from the vulnerability, and in addition to the 2 4-drop units, you also have a 4-cost spell, so you have like 3 4-cost cards and no 5-cost cards. So there's room to just move one card up the curve to upgrade the power level, since there's room in the curve anyway. So yeah, this deck's okay, but also probably a bit overplayed right now, because people, I guess, trying new stuff, enjoying different stuff, and figuring things out. But yeah, my long-term guess is this deck is fine, but not much more. I also talked about like this with past teammate from Eternal on stream a while back that also knows BBG, and BBG is also coming from Eternal, and he has been playing this among others on ladder for a bunch, and despite him doing fairly well with it, he agreed that the deck is only like solid and has no realistic potential to be like a top tier deck, just like a solid option to play if you like it, but not the best, like one of the best decks to play. Alright, so next we have the King of the Hill still, Heimerdinger, or Weimar Republic, or whatever you want to call it, Heimerdinger. It got hit by the nerfs a bit. Deep Meditation now being more expensive matters, since the deck isn't very good at making it reduce in cost anyway, because all the spells are so expensive. Basically, what you need usually is like a Flash of Brilliance into another spell turn to get Deep Meditation cheaper the next turn. But the fact that it costs 3 now instead of 2, while it still is overall a nerf, because even if it gives you a good turret with Heimerdinger, it's still worse to pay a mana more. But it's, in this deck, mitigated a bit by the fact that now it adds to your 3-cost spells that you that are burst, that can give you an elusive turret that you can play right away before passing action, for example, which is a neat compensation for the nerf, basically. Otherwise, deck is still the same as before. 0 cards changed, no reason to. Most popular deck for how popular it is, I'm personally actually not facing it that much, but I guess that's just variance since the data clearly shows us it's very popular. And it is a good deck. It's one of the tier 1 decks and one of the decks you want to keep in mind when selecting and building and tuning decks against the field to win on ladder and climb. Alright, now we're gonna look at the top 5 highest win rate decks. Keep in mind, I lowered the bar a bit this week because there were a lot of decks that were kind of close to the like 500 game mark, and it's the first week. Decks are very scattered, so people play a larger variety of decks, so it's harder for individual new concepts to reach that benchmark. And I figured if something is around the 400 game mark, when most other decks are like below 200 or 100 games per archetype, it's still a reasonable sample size to look at them and bring you some interesting, promising higher win rate concepts. So let's take a look. First, we have said Bilgewater Freljord MF deck. So this is not just popular, it's also doing decently. 75% win rate is okay, but like I said, I expect this win rate to go down, which firmly puts it into like the tier 2 category and performance that I was mentioning. But for now, it's a deck that you can do decently well with, and 57% is not bad. Next, we have Freljord Noxus, but not the one we were looking at before. It's Ash Sejuani. We have seen this deck before Sejuani existed. It was hyped for a while and then quickly disappeared because the deck is very narrow and limited at what it is good against. It's basically an anti-midrange deck, making it pretty bad against controlling decks a lot of the time, and also not great against aggressive stuff that just kind of runs you over. So yeah, I think this deck is a trap, it's a fad, it's a cool deck, it's a deck that people enjoy, but it's not a good deck, and it will probably disappear into like lower tier 2 or tier 3 that it has always been for most of the games existent. This specific list has a lot of things that I don't like. Running only 2 Elixir and 2 Brittle Steel is so wrong on so many levels to me. Running Everosen Sentry is pretty random, and I would rather run the 3/2 Noxus guy that gives quick attack to help out Glory Seeker, for example. I'm not sure how I feel about not running the Rimefang Wolf, because the card is not amazing, but it's pretty solid, and especially once you run the quick attack guy, it does a pretty good job in this specific deck and helps with board control. Trapper is fine, but also a bit of a risk against all the like pilfer cards. Reckoning, I don't even know how to feel about this. This seems very narrow, prone to being blown out, and yeah, situational and clunky, and yeah, not a big fan. So I think the archetype is probably long-term a tier 3 deck, and this version isn't even that great, so play at your own risk. But it is doing okay right now, because people are all over the place and playing playing a lot of like kind of these badish tier 2, tier 3 mid-range decks that will fade away more and more as soon as the metagame starts to develop and settle more, and the new like premier clear tier 1 decks will emerge, I think. Next we have by Heimerdinger. It's not just popular, it's also doing really well. It's the 3rd highest win rate deck of this week still, 60.5%, pretty great win rate. Anything above 60 is really good, especially in Master. We're not even every week in the past had decks, I think, that broke the 60% win rate, or at least not multiples in a lot of weeks. So that is still a very, very good win rate, even though it only comes in 3rd here. But if you look at the next one, it's 60.8, so they're basically tied in terms of win rate. What we have here is good old Elusives. 100% the same deck. Currently 3 Will of Ionia, 1 Deny, because Deny is not that great, not that well positioned, not that many things you need to or want to deny efficiently. I've actually been playing this deck again on stream surprised that it's actually like has caught on again, fairly popular. I just thought to myself a couple days ago that this could actually be like kind of good against all these like dirtly hyper mid-range, trying to out mid-range each other decks, because that's the kind of decks that Elusive just eats for breakfast. And tried it again. The only thing I did is I cut the elixir for Fury of the North. While Fury is more clunky, it's so much more powerful and flexible and adds so much more to the deck that I'm willing to give up on elixir. Like, elixir is a good card, but I've never felt it has like that huge of an impact in this archetype, while Fury of the North just does so much, and you can only run one or the other because you can only run 6 Freljord cards realistically, and you can't cut Omen Hawk. Also, you don't want to cut Omen Hawk because Omen Hawk is really good. But yeah, otherwise, this is what I've been playing, and I've went like 19-2 so far with it, mostly on stream. Climbed to top 100. Deck is really, really good again, and I would expect it to potentially be one of the tier 1 decks. Again, long term. People have just kind of put it aside for a bit too long, forgotten about it a bit too long, and there may have also been times where it actually wasn't that great, but then people kind of didn't try frequently enough, I think, to see if it actually is still poorly positioned. And now with like some other power level outliers having brought down, Elusives can shine again. Because one of the reasons I think why it fell out of favor was that its power level got brought down enough that there were other things that were pushed and powerful enough, more powerful and more pushed enough to kind of dominate Elusives or be more appealing than Elusives just based on like raw power, raw performance. But now that a lot of these outliers have been nerfed as well and brought down to like Elusive's level again, so I think in a level playing field, Elusives is a pretty strong deck again. It just struggled when everyone is like way more powerful than Elusives, which is why I think is part of why it disappeared for a while. But yeah, I've had great success with it. One of my best performances so far, 19-2 over like 21 games. It's an insane record at like high masters. So this is for real and it's back. And I'll link my comprehensive deck tech guide up here for you guys. There's really no point in making like a new deck tech on an old deck that basically hasn't changed, except that I no longer like the Noxus splash I used to prefer back then over Freljord after some intensive testing. And just the new Fury of the North really makes me like Freljord again over Noxus. Otherwise the deck is the same, built the same for the same reasons, functions the same, has similar matchups and stuff. So if you want to get a full breakdown on Elusives and how they work, why they are built the way they are built, and how to pilot them and see them in action, you can check out the deck tech that I linked above in the card. And on to the winner of this week in terms of win rate. Keep in mind the win rate, the sample size is fairly low here. It's like 394 games. This is the latest concoction by Tier Red. This deck's kind of cool and kind of interesting. I played it a bit. I've not been super impressed. I think the deck has its weirdness and awkwardness to it, but it is kind of a interesting and promising concept. It might have some room for improvement. This is sort of like an elusive burn deck, the first time that term actually applies, because you have your elusives to get damage in, and then you have like Imperial Demolitionist, Crimson Disciple Transfusion to deal a lot of direct damage, especially because this deck can rebuy Disciple and Demolitionist a lot. So even though it only runs these like 2-ish burn cards, can actually deal a lot of burn damage. Like it can even technically just stall out and deal like 20 that way. If it can keep the opponent from killing these guys, and you just keep juggling them around with Solitary Monk, Conspirator, Retreat, and even Will of Ionia if you have to. When I tried the deck, I wasn't a big fan of Crimson Curator. It just didn't feel that great and play that well. Monk is a bit questionable because it can be quite awkward. I think the version that I got from him then didn't have Hatchling yet, which is a nice addition. Hatchling is a very good card, and I can see that being a nice addition. I don't remember what the version had instead. But yeah, this is an interesting new concept, and there's quite a bunch of variation. People are trying all kinds of similar decks, some with Decimate, a lot of like variations, but the core concept is like Elusives plus like the Noxus, Imperial, Demolitionist, Crimson Disciple, Reach package with some of the recycling bounds and transfusion stuff. So yeah, to be fair, I felt that the traditional Kinku Wayfinder Elusives just felt better, more consistent, and more powerful still. But this is certainly an interesting and cool strategy, and there are certain decks that just cannot beat this, while it felt really awkward against other strategies, so it felt a bit like hit or miss. And I think the win rate is also part of the sample, is partially due to the sample size, novelty, and people like not really knowing what's going on at times and playing against it properly because it's so new. But yeah, we'll see how it develops, if it will stick around next week, and how the win rate adjusts to get a better idea where it fits, if and where it fits in long term. All right. That concludes all 10 decks of this week. We have some interesting new things here. Things are still in flux a lot. I think there are a bunch of like kind of badish or lower tier decks that are a bit of a trap, that are quite popular right now, as a lot of the time actually after shakeups like this. So keep that in mind, and I hope my evaluation, my analysis helps you potentially avoid some of these, and we'll see how right I am about these assumptions and assessments as the weeks go on. And yeah, you know the drill. Before you leave, if you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, turn on notification icon for more metagame breakdowns like this, and deck techs and so on. I'll try and get you the next deck tech in the next couple days. And yeah, show the sponsors some love, LOR Guardian and NordVPN. You can find the links to the LOR Guardian app and the NordVPN deal to support the channel and keep your internet connection secure, and so on, in the description down below. And otherwise, come visit me at my stream, catch me live, usually Monday through Friday during the day European time, and hang out and let's play some Runeterra, or sometimes Eternal and other things. Alright, that's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.